everyone. This is Miss Moriarty, and I'm here to discuss with us topic 6.8 as well as topic 6.9. So, this video is going to be all about the advantages and disadvantages of both solar energy as well as hydroelectric. Now, both solar energy and hydroelectric are two types of renewable resources that we are starting to see increase in popularity around the world. Probably the most common form of solar energy that everybody might be familiar with is actually the use of PV panels, PV cells. Full name would be a photovoltaic solar cell. These types of panels are designed to capture light energy from the sun and transform it directly into electrical energy. Now, how they do this, typically those solar panels are made up of silicone, which is a semiconductor that emits a low electrical current voltage when exposed to the sun. So the photons, which are the particles carrying energy from the sun, are going to cause a separation of charge between the two semiconductor layers. So you can kind of see that happening here. The electrons are going to separate from the protons. They're going to flow through the circuit to then deliver energy as electricity. We oftentimes see PV cells placed on things like roofs of buildings, or maybe even inside a PV farm. But what tends to happen is that electrical energy is then sent back to some sort of grid for then other users to use. So oftentimes when someone does have PV cells on their roof, technically they can earn a credit from their utility company because now they are generating their own electricity. Now, the problem with using PV panels is they are limited by the availability of light. Right, we know that the sun really only comes out in the daytime, so what tends to happen at night? Well, usually any energy that is not necessarily used in the daytime tends to get stored at night. A way in which we could maybe solve that availability of light issue would maybe to purchase larger batteries that could continue to store energy that gets generated. However, in doing this, it tends to be very costly on top of already purchasing the panels themselves. Now, another form of solar energy is called active solar energy. This is where the actual solar energy is used to heat a liquid through some sort of mechanical or electrical equipment built in your home. And what tends to happen, especially if you have a solar water heater, is it can actually be built to capture the sun's energy and then circulate that warmed fluid and transfer heat all around your home. So instead of using things like natural gas or an electric heater to then heat your home, you can actually just simply use the warmed water directly from the sun. Another type is one that actually doesn't really require much equipment at all, and this is called passive solar energy. This is where the system or whatever you may have built is going to naturally absorb the heat directly from the sun. But in order to do this, you do need to orient the design of your building in a certain way. Right, so you want to make sure that you block sunlight in warmer months while allowing more sunlight during colder months. What this can do is help to regulate the temperature inside your home by making it warmer in the colder months and making it cooler in the warmer months. How might you do this? You can build very specific types of windows. You want to make sure that those windows are southern facing with potentially a roof overhang and maybe build in some deciduous trees to create some shade in order to create a little bit more regulation of temperature. We can also, in your home, build a skylight to decrease any electricity use, or even build dark colored sunlight floors in order to absorb more of that heat just naturally. Now, in developing nations, they can actually use a really interesting form of passive solar energy in the form of a solar oven. This is one in where we actually tend to see the sun's heat is used to then cook food. To do that, we tend to create a device that is going to be built to reflect and absorb sunlight as well as insulate the heat in order to then cook a simple type of food. Now, overall, solar energy systems tend to have a low impact because they do not really produce any carbon dioxide emissions, but the problem is they can be expensive. Now, another part of solar energy that I would like us to know um, is the fact that when building solar energy farms, right, especially since now solar is becoming a more popular form of renewable energy, when building them, we would think that the best place to go would most likely be a desert, right? Lots of sunlight, very open space. However, when building these very large solar farms, they can actually have a negative impact on the desert. And that's simply because now those solar panels, which are much darker in color, tend to absorb a lot of sunlight, hence creating far more heat. So it actually has the ability to slightly change the local climate in that desert ecosystem, which can impact the organisms that live there. Now, here's just a table kind of outlining the main advantages, disadvantages of solar. Right? Remember, we know it is a renewable resource, it is pollution free, it has the ability to reduce electricity bills. However, we know that it can require lots of space. To install solar energy typically has a high initial cost. It can be limited by the availability of sunlight versus day and night or wherever you may be located on Earth. Um, and just overall, I would say biggest disadvantage of solar is definitely its cost. Now, moving on to hydroelectric power. This is another type of renewable resource in where we can see electricity is generated through the movement of water. Hydroelectric power we usually associate with dams. Dams are usually a large structure built typically to prevent the movement of a river in order to collect water into a reservoir. Now, why we do this is so that we can actually control then the movement of water in order to generate electricity. So this should kind of sound very familiar since we know that this same method is typically used when we look at the electricity generation from fossil fuels. Except this time, steam isn't necessarily involved. Here, we are just actually controlling the flow of water, which is going to spin a turbine. We know that that spinning of that turbine is then going to provide power to a generator and eventually electricity. Now, in looking at hydroelectric power, especially when we saw in our article analysis, a lot of different states and even countries around the world actually tend to rely on hydroelectric power. And it's important to note that besides our fossil fuels, hydroelectric tends to be one of the most popular forms of energy being provided. It is also important to note that in looking at the three biggest hydroelectricity producers, that would be the US, Brazil, and China, China actually has the largest dam in the world known as the Three Gorges Dam. Now, the other type of hydroelectric power that we need to know is also tidal energy. This is using a very similar type of mechanism with spinning a turbine and so on. However, instead of having to build a structure involved here, we can actually use the same concept and use the flow of the tides. The only problem with this form of hydroelectric power is it's really only limited to coastal areas. Now, overall, hydroelectric power we know doesn't generate any air pollution or waste. The construction of the power plants, however, and creating a dam can be quite expensive. So there could be a loss of or change in the habitats involved in creating a dam. So overall, right, advantages and disadvantages of creating a dam for hydroelectric purposes, we know would be to obviously provide electrical power. It creates a reservoir of water, so it might provide maybe irrigation to agricultural areas nearby. It can help in flood control, commercial fishing, ecosystem services. However, we know that in building a dam, right, preventing the flow of water is going to disrupt the ecosystem. It may increase the sediment pollution found within the dam. We know it's going to displace maybe even the people that might live there, and so on. All right, everyone, that is it for our video on solar and hydroelectric. Make sure as you watch, you took notes. Please mark this as done and be ready to talk about this in class tomorrow.